Hugh Pill, the chief economist at the Bank of England. Maybe there's more than a grain of truth. Maybe there's the whole entire harvest of truth in this. And the fact is, what he said has a lot of truth in it, but he didn't say it very well. He had his hobnail boots on rather than these sleek city slicker loafers. He's the chief economist at the Bank of England, and he's urged people to stop trying to keep up with the spiralling cost of living and accept that they are worse off. And this is interesting. He compared raising wages and prices in response to high inflation as a game of pass the parcel, where each player is unwilling to accept the burden of higher prices, and they pass it on, and they pass it on, and they pass it on, and there's your spiral. And he's criticising businesses too in all this. Does he have a point? We've lived so well, so long, as a poet once said, low interest rates, inflation matching wage rises, little luxury. Is it a case of it is so over? Rich coming from him, you might say, and indeed Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, worth reminding ourselves what he said. He told workers, he told you not to ask for a pay rise to keep up with inflation. So if you run a business, if you're negotiating wage rises, if you're feeling the pinch, if you're on strike, if you're going to go on strike, prosperity is history. Austerity, normality, is that just a fact of life, or is it something up with which you will not put? One prime minister once said, "You've never had it so good. Right now, a lot of you will never have had it so bad." So what do you think? 08085 909 693 and text us on 85058. Thomas Moore, fund manager at... what's it called now, Thomas? It's ABRDN. It's like you've
Aberdeen.
missed the vowels out of where I went to
Nicky,
university.
It's Aberdeen, without the vowels.
Yeah. Without the vowels, irritable vowel syndrome. There we are. Formerly Standard Life. Good to have you on, Thomas. And Richard Murphy, another friend of the phone-in. Hello, Richard. How are you this morning? Professor of Accounting Practice at Sheffield University Management School, Director of Tax Research, UK LLP. Are you all right, Richard? Are you there, Richard? Can we speak to you, Richard? We'll get Richard. Don't worry.
You've got me. Sorry. I've been sitting waiting for the programme to start on mute, Nicky. That's my apology.
Oh, Richard. Honestly, it's good to have you there. Right, Lee in Caterham. Let's go straight for Lee. Hello, Lee.
Morning, Nicky.
Yeah. What do you think of this? Chief Economist, Bank of England, Hugh Pill, we need to accept the fact that we are just poorer.
Well, let me say first of all, two things actually. First of all, morning, Thomas. Actually, I know you from the past when I was an equity analyst covering banks and Eurostan Life. But anyway, that's a coincidence.
Well, thanks for calling us. That's good. What happy serendipity.
You're
anyway,
reuniting all these people, Nicky, without knowing it.
I'm close to tears. So seriously.
First of all, I haven't read the speech. It's probably on the Bank of England website now. I don't know, but so I. All right.
Does he have a
comment
point
on the overall context and what the overall messaging is. It's clear that this particular comment that's been picked up is being, looks like quite an insensitive comment, shall we say. Mm-hmm. But if you think about the fundamentals, my point is that actually I think what it was, the message that we are poorer as a country than we perhaps used to be or like to think we are, I think is correct. And it's because two fundamental things have happened over the last, particularly in the COVID period and just after with Ukraine, but it was probably some of these were going on for some time. And that is, first of all, the terms of trade, as it's known, have gone against UK. That is to say, we have to pay a lot more for our imports than we get for our exports. Yeah. And the second thing that's happened is there are limits. The era of ultra-low interest rates is over. And it's clearly we are reaching some sort of limit on how much we can keep borrowing as a country. So interest rates are higher, and there's concerns about the UK's ability to keep funding, by borrowing. Now, all that means is we basically, don't have, in real terms, the spending power that we used to. I mean, I tried to explain it, and I'm sorry if I sound a bit trite in doing this and insensitive.
It's all good.
It's like, I explain it to my kids, it's like you're saying, well, we used to have 10 sweets to share out amongst us every day, and now we have 9. And that's just the reality. What we need to, we can print more money, we can, and all those sorts of things, but it'll just put prices up. And so in real terms, we are poorer. The issue, therefore, is really one about having a discussion about distribution of those 9 and who needs to have given up some of what they had before.
That's the political decision.
Indeed.
Decisions.
But I mean, and I think that we do need to address those issues in an adult sort of way, and obviously the way it's being addressed at the moment is by various groups going on strike or looking for big pay rises and those sort of things, looking after themselves. But as I say, I think the fundamental point that we are poorer as a country than we used to be or thought we were, I think is absolutely correct.
Yeah. Let me just put a couple of things in that he said. Yes, essentially the days of wine and roses are long gone. He was speaking to a podcast by Columbia Law School, Beyond Unprecedented, the Post-Pandemic Economy. And, people were rushing to listen to it. But this is what he said. He said, when your energy bill that you get every month at your house goes up 4 or 5 times, that's eating into your income. What's the natural thing to do? Well, the natural thing to do is to say, I need to be paid more. But then, of course, that process is ultimately self-defeating. And Lee, something you said earlier on about imports and exports, using gas prices as an example, he said this. He said that while the gas Britain buys from around the world has become significantly more expensive since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what the country sells has not. Lee, I'm going to put this to Thomas as well, and then Richard, you can come in. Martin in Gainsborough, everybody's welcome. You know the numbers, 08085 909 693 85058. Taking his lack of tact, perhaps, his size 12 shoes or whatever out of this, does he have a point, Thomas Moore?
This is the problem, which is that it's a collective issue, this. Wages need to go up at the individual level in order to compensate for the loss of earnings, of real earnings that we've got. The disposable income is felt, very personally, isn't it? But he's talking here about the collective issue, which is who's going to share the burden in getting inflation down. And this is the issue. It's the issue between collectives here as a nation, how are we going to deal with it, and then individually. And it's the way in which he's expressed this sentiment hasn't gone down well. And I think it was specifically these words, need to accept. This is red rag to the bull. But you can see that underlying all of this, he's got a point, which is as long as inflation stays high, we are going to demand higher wages, and as long as we demand higher wages, inflation is going to stay high.
That's the pass the parcel thing, isn't it, that he's talking about?
Absolutely.
So there's a kernel of a truth in there. More than that, Richard Murphy, what do you say?
No, there's no truth in it at all. It's completely wrong. And so are the comments that we've just heard completely wrong. There is no reason why this country is poorer now. Let's talk about why this country is poorer now. First of all, and it has to be put on the table, Brexit. That is the reason why our balance of trade has got worse. The pound has fallen dramatically, well over 20%.
The reason or one reason?
One reason why we have worse terms of trade, most certainly. And by far the biggest part of it is also a big part in the issues around food, for example, because clearly European continental suppliers do not want to send food to the UK because it's simply too difficult, too costly, too burdensome to get through the ports. So that is a massive issue. But secondly, there is the simple fact that we've had 2 other deliberate policies in place. One is austerity. We've had it since 2010. And austerity is a deliberate policy by the government to reduce the income of the country. That is what it means. Quite literally, the government will not spend. And what the government spends is part of our national income. And it has deliberately crushed its contribution. But by crushing its contribution to our national income, it has reduced the amount that everybody else has had to spend and therefore crushed their contribution as well. And then there is the policy of the Bank of England. Let's be clear. Hugh Pill is saying, Hugh Pill and Andrew Bailey, if I put the 2 words together correctly, are saying that we must accept that they, non-elected politicians, bureaucrats, incredibly well-paid bureaucrats, Andrew Bailey on over $500,000 a year, have the right to choose to cut our incomes by increasing interest rates. It's entirely untrue that we have now ended the era of low interest rates. That is a political choice. It's a stupid political choice. It does not control inflation because you can't control the price of oil and gas coming out of Russia by changing the interest rate in the UK. So it can't control inflation, but it has massively redistributed wealth upwards in our society from those who borrow to those who save. And that is against all known sensible social policy. And at the same time, we have them saying we must accept this. Well, I don't accept this, nor do I accept that the government need to continue with a policy of continuing austerity, which is what they're doing by saying they must balance the books. These things are not true.
Right, and there's lots of political decisions, as you say. There's loads to address there. And Lee, Martin, are we with you in a second? Lee, do you want to come back on that? You've got in touch. You're a caller. It's a phone-in. And a lot of this is political. And Richard says, we need to accept being poorer. No, we do not. Lee.
Well, I mean, there are lots of politics in this, as I was suggesting, because ultimately it's going to come down to issues of distribution. If you've got, as I say, those 10 sweeties, who gives up the one that they had before or whatever. But I mean, and I think there's a valid criticism of the Bank of England, not just in terms of its incentive comments, but in that it is focused on, wages and said, we don't want this inflation to get embedded by big wage increases. But it hasn't really focused on things like profit margins. I think more recently it's tried to address that by saying, we do hope companies won't pass on all the cost increases and so on. But I think it was a bit slow to do that. So I think there was some criticism of the Bank of England, quite valid criticism in that respect, trying to push all of the burden onto Labour, as it were. But look, I mean, I think that Brexit has been a contributor, but a relatively small part of this. I just think there's much more fundamental things have been going on, not just in the UK. The UK happens to be particularly exposed, I think, in terms of the makeup of its trade to this. As I mentioned, the terms of trade have moved against us because we are big importers of lots of the things that prices have gone up, and that is just what has happened. And so we are more exposed as an economy. It probably doesn't help that we've had Brexit, of course not. But I think, look, with austerity, I mean, as it turns out, history will probably say, we had too much austerity for too long. Because when you look at it, actually, COVID came along and we found scope to borrow more. Every government did. However, I do think you need to sort of think that at the time when that government came in what was 2010, the UK was basically running a huge deficit on its current account, and also on its fiscal deficit.
Well, let's lay that out.
My point would be they had to do something. There was a feeling that they had to do something because we know with the mini budget and all the fiasco around that, there is a limit to what Britain can do on its own.
Let's take it from. Richard, we'll let you back, but let's take it from Threadneedle Street to Merthyr and Gainsborough. Arthur in Merthyr, how are you doing?
All right, thank you. I'm enjoying the programme.
Thank you very much. It's a good issue to get into. It affects everybody. How is it affecting you?
Oh, terrible. Absolutely terrible. I mean, the thing is, you've got these rich guys that doesn't know what it's like to be poor. They don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. And they've got the cheek to tell us that we should bear the pain and the suffering and that. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, the thing is, as I stated earlier on when I called in, it's easy when you haven't got to go through the pain yourself to tell other people to go through the pain and bear the pain. Now, this guy should be made to live what we've got to live on and see what we've got to do, and that's how he likes it and that. It's very easy when you're on 160,000 a year to tell people who are perhaps less than 20,000 a year, oh, it doesn't matter, and that, you can do it, you can do this, you can do that. I wish I had his wages and that. I wouldn't have to worry about going to food banks then, like he don't have to. I wouldn't have to worry about paying my letters like he don't have to, and that. But the fact of the matter is, the people of this country have been financially starved for far too long. And I say financially starved. That means they haven't been given enough money to live on for far too long. 13 years we've had with the Conservative government. And that's all they've done is cut this, cut that, cut this, cut that.
Basically, you think the likes of Andrew Bailey and also Mr. Pill are living in a world totally detached from reality. Arthur, you expressed that very well. Christine in Weymouth, Martin in Gainsborough. Martin, can I say we're getting so many texts at the moment as well. People who are watching us and listening to us, could you put a name and the town of your text as well? Because we're getting a lot of anons at the moment. It's nice to know who you are and where you're calling from. You can be anonymous if you want, but please do put that on your text. With you in a minute, Richard. With you in a minute, Thomas. Martin first off, then Christine. Martin, when you hear comments like this, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a bit of a cheek for hello, Nicky. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a cheek for an overpaid top person in the Bank of England telling people to accept being poorer. People at the lower end are using all their income just to live, just to get by on food and fuel and get to work. There's no disposable income left. People like that man in the Bank of England is probably on £600,000, £700,000 a year. They say they earn that. No, they don't earn that. They get paid it. But people at the top end, there's a huge difference between what they earn and what they get paid. They get paid far more than what they actually earn. And people at the bottom end are struggling to get by. What they should do is cut the income tax level to the level of the minimum wage, so you can earn £20,000 before the government take any off you in tax.
Christine, what do you think? Thanks ever so much, Martin. Christine.
Morning, Nicky.
Morning,
actually,
Christine.
some of the previous callers' comments, I'd agree with that what you're allowed to earn definitely should be a lot higher for those of us middle earners, especially those who are self-employed. But I just think that it's not a question of accepting being poorer. And yes, it's easy for somebody at the top of the tree who earns a lot of money to say this. But nobody, you never hear anybody saying, right, it's about time you lived within your means. And as somebody who's been a mother since the 80s and who's now 65, approaching pension age next year, when I had children, you had to live within your means. If you couldn't afford to have it, you didn't have it. But now it seems that a lot of people, and I'm not saying everybody, but there are people that feel entitled to have everything. And nobody will say it because you'll get slated. So if you can afford to go out and buy packets of cigarettes or do all these other things, and then you say, I can't afford to eat or feed my children, there's something wrong there somewhere. But nobody ever challenges that and says, right, okay, what are you spending your money on? And if you're spending it on that, don't say you can't afford to eat. I'd love to be rich. I'd love to have lots of money. I don't think that's ever going to happen. So it's not a question of accepting that we're poorer. It's just accepting that maybe there are other things that we could do, that at some point life will get better, hopefully, and live within your means a little bit more. And
Well,
I'm
you know,
sorry
I mean,
if that sounds,
No, this is what it's about. It's about hearing. Who said no?
Could I make one further point, Nicky?
Yeah, well, you speak to Christine about that. She makes a point that I see and hear being made, and this is a forum where people are allowed to say stuff like that. I mean, Christine's slightly apologetic, saying, "Well, you won't like me saying that," but you said it, and you're allowed to say it, and you're allowed to express it. But what do you say about what you heard, Martin, from Christine?
Are you back to me, to Martin?
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah. There's one further point I'd like to make. People at the bottom end, if they get a pay rise, they spend that money in their own local economy on the high streets, whereas people at the top end invest it overseas in tax-free accounts overseas. So people at the top end getting on the money they're on is not benefiting the economy as much as people at the bottom end who spend it the economy and circulate that money around.
Point made. Christine, what you're saying is Christine, what you're saying as well is what has been expressed by Lee Anderson, who is one of the vice chairs of the Conservative Party, who says that anyone earning more than £30,000 using food banks must have budgeting problems. He says, I have constituents, armed forces, bin men, bar staff, care workers, bus drivers, pensioners who can all live on less. Am I missing something? Do you think he has a point,
Hello?
Christine?
Am I
Christine?
still...
Yeah, Arthur, just a second. Yeah, you are, Arthur, and then we're going to hear Richard in a second. Just Christine,
Can I come in on something a minute?
1 wee second. Of course you can. Of course. I want Christine to just say that. Do you think there's anything in what Lee Anderson said? We've got a politicians panel later. Do you think there's a grain of truth in that, Christine?
I think there is, but I think the trouble is, it's most politicians are out of touch completely. They completely haven't got a clue what actually goes on in real life. And I agree with what the other caller said about people spending money locally in their economy, which is what we all need to do. But it's what they're spending it on and how they're spending it. And those of us that pay tax, You know, we're working hard to sort of keep up with everything. If you're self-employed, you can't go to somebody and demand a pay rise. So there is a disparity there. But, yeah, I think MPs are slightly out of touch. I think to be an MP, personally, you shouldn't, it shouldn't be a career. You should have to do a job.
All right, we hear this a lot. There's a couple of things in there. We've got our politicians panel later on. Richard, I want you to respond to some of the stuff we've heard. But Arthur, lead us into Richard Murphy again, because, living within our means is basically what this is all about. Go on, Arthur.
Yeah, the thing is, it's easier to say living within your means, and that would be okay if it was the same, if you was trying to get more all the time. It's harder to live within your means when prices are going up all the time, because the means that you got to live in get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's not even asking for more and more and expanding your means. It's that the means that you have to live in is getting shrinking all the time.
And Alex features. One second. Alex features with us. Richard Murphy, say your piece, and I get Alex Feach to respond to it. But Alex Feach from British Chambers of Commerce. Hello. I think that you have a certain, I think I'm right in saying, certain sympathy with what we heard from Hugh Pill. Are you there, Alex?
I'm here, Nicky. Good morning.
Good. Respond to Richard, who's going to respond to what we've been hearing from our listeners and our viewers. I hear a chucklesome Richard Murphy. We've heard people really struggling, and people struggling to believe what they've actually heard here. Christine saying, we all need to live between our means. What do you hear about what you say about what you're hearing, Richard?
Right, let me put this into a simple context. I think I really agree with Arthur. He's right, and I agree with the comment that Martin made about money circulating in the local economy. He's right. I'm not totally sure I agree with Christine, because we actually aren't living within our means. As a country, we could do so much more than we are. We know we could have a functioning NHS, a functioning education system, and so on. So we're clearly not living within our means. We're living well below our means as a country. But we are forcing people to live on, well, actually less than they need to meet their needs because of what the choices being made. Now, let's explain what those four choices are. There really are four. There can be an increase in wages. There can be an increase in prices. There can be an increase in taxes, and there can be an increase in the cost of money, all of which have an impact upon this equation about how we manage the current situation. The government has increased taxes. They have actually gone up on most working people by more than the rate of inflation. The government has massively increased the price of money. It's quite absurd that when we're talking about controlling inflation, the way in which we apparently control inflation is to massively increase the price of money, which is ludicrous, because it harms real people either through mortgages or rents, and it benefits those with wealth who, as Martin rightly pointed out, don't spend it, therefore fueling the decline in the economy. We could have a control on prices, but we haven't. The IMF and the World Bank both recognize that there is now greedflation. Greedflation is companies increasing their prices by more than their costs. And then there is this so-called wage spiral, which is what Hugh Pill is targeting and what Andrew Bailey was targeting, and which the government is targeting, where they say, if we put up wages, we will put up inflation. You cannot put up inflation by increasing the wages of people in the NHS, because there's no charge for the NHS. All you can do is actually release money into the economy so people can spend, and so we can have the economy that we want and of which we are capable. And that is the answer to this. And the government should be cutting interest rates, cutting taxes, and releasing more money into the economy, which is what we did to get through 2020, 2021 and 2008, because we're in crisis and it needs to react and spend to give us growth. And it
react to that. Alex Feach from British Chambers of Commerce.
Good morning, Nicky. Thanks for having us on. I'm going to give you the perspective from the business community.
I really want you to address what Richard Murphy said, because Richard he represents a cogent strand of philosophy that we hear a lot, that goes against the grain of fiscal policy in this country for many a long year. What do you think about his arguments?
Well, I think if we just put this into two sort of buckets of time, there was a kind of world pre-Russian invasion of Ukraine and the world we inhabit now. And I think if we look back to before this huge spike in oil prices and food prices and all these what the economists call external factors that have come through to the economy, there was quite a degree of skepticism about raising interest rates. But I think the Bank of England's hand has been forced somewhat as we've seen inflation driven by these external factors raised to historically high levels. So I think, without wanting to get into the ins and outs of who's right and wrong, the Bank of England have a job to do, and I think actually quite a limited set of tools in their toolbox. With
Are they
which
doing it
to
well?
do it. Well, they're doing what they can within the bounds of how they're set up. And so one of the things they do is set interest rates, and their judgment, as you will know, the listeners will know, is you put up interest rates and that dampens down demand in the economy. Now, is that the only thing that can reduce inflation? No. You know, this, and I think Richard said it earlier about can't control oil prices. That's absolutely right. So what we're saying is, can we look at this in the round and actually just to go back to the comments about wages, I think really businesses get stuck in the middle with this, because inflation for things businesses spend money on, raw materials, import
stop
prices.
right there. Let me just throw a couple of things in. Tina McKenzie, policy chairman of the Federation of Small Businesses, said small businesses will be rightly angered by these tone-deaf comments from Mr. Pill as they struggle with inflation that is still sky high. Just threw that in for you, Alex. Joe in Kings Lynn coming up. Alex, carry on.
Well, that's exactly right. They are struggling with inflation. It's one of the top two concerns. You know, inflation has been an absolute, a hornet's sting for the business community, especially since Russia invaded Ukraine. It's a dreadful situation. And one thing it is doing is of course driving demands from employees to be paid more money. Of course it is. And we've seen that in public and private sector.
And a lot of small businesses have absorbed as everything that they can at the moment.
They are.
I can hear people tearing their hair out, as they watch and listen to this.
Nicky,
if you were the chairman of the Bank of England, if you were the governor, how would you deal with inflation? What would you do?
Well, I think the Bank of England are doing what they think is right within the tools of the toolbox. Nicky, what I wanted to say about the people side is that one way to actually try and solve this is to increase the amount of supply of people entering or coming back into the workforce. And so ourselves and the wider business community we represent have been pushing for a long time to have a different, a more sort of liberal approach, if you like, to bringing in skilled people from overseas to make up for the fact that we have a crippling lack of workforce in the country at the moment. And any business you speak to, they say, we cannot get enough skilled people. We want to grow, we want to fulfill orders, but we've got a lack of people. So we do need to train British people. There's a lot going on to try to encourage people back into the workforce or into the workforce for the first time. We're really involved in that. We're pushing that.
Was Brexit a problem? How much of a problem was Brexit then? You're talking about bringing people in to work and to work hard and to do stuff that some people in this country don't want to do. Alex, where does Brexit rank in the list of problems that we have now?
I mean, I think, to be honest, something like this, Brexit's quite neutral, because what it does is it gives the UK full flexibility on how it controls the type of skilled people that it wishes to attract to this country. That's what it does in reality. And so we're asking government to tweak the dials to enable business to access the skilled people they need, and at the same time, keep doing what they're doing to encourage people back into work or into jobs for the first time. That is a really good side. And we need to do both things at the same time. And that is one way in which we will try and ease the pressure on wages and gradually ease the pressure on inflation as well.
Nicky, can I correct something Alex has said? You started by saying the world oil price is the problem. The world oil price today is the same as it was in 2018 and is much lower than it was in 2013 and 14. So to claim that that is the cause of the problem we now face, and this is all down to war in Ukraine, is simply not true. That is not the cause of the problems we face. That is not now where the issue is. The issues are elsewhere, and they're political choices. They're not because of world prices.
Thank you very much, everybody, thus far. So interesting. And as ever,
can I come in with a comment?
Arthur,
Hello?
any time you
Yeah.
like. Arthur, your last comment before the news. Go on.
The thing is, right, this country has suffered from lack of investment in industry for years. We had 18 years of lack of investment, then we had 13 years of lack of investment, all from the Conservative Party. Now, what should have been done is the companies in this country should have been invested in so we could have kept them. The long-term companies like Vauxhall, Jaguar, Leyland, and all them companies and that. And instead, we've let them go abroad. There are many things that were invented in this country that are no longer associated with this country because it's been brought by people outside the country. And I mean, the thing is, this country is in a terrible state because of things like that. Now, you talk about more people working. How can more people find employment to work themselves out of poverty when you've got jobs that don't last long? Short-term employment.
Arthur, thank you so much for getting in touch with us and making such a valuable contribution, as have all our listeners. So keep them coming. 85058 on the text, 08085 909 693. Thanks to Arthur. Thanks to everybody. More to come. It is 9:33. So we've got, as I said, Joe in Kings Lynn talking about whether we just have to accept the fact that we are in a poorer era or not, following the comments by the chief economist at the Bank of England, Hugh Pill, which says, look, he says we're poorer, and that's just a fact of life in this day and age. Hi, Joe. And Onker in Tamworth as well. Still lurking in the background. Thomas Moore, fund manager at Aberdeen, formerly Standard Life, and Richard Murphy, professor of accounting practice at Sheffield University Management School. Joe, thanks for waiting.
Good morning. You're more than welcome.
What do you think about what he said and how it affects your life?
I think it's total rubbish. Why is it that the people that go out to work every day that keep our services afloat, why are they being called greedy if they need a decent pay rise? Bearing in mind that what they're asking for pay rises, they're not actually getting. And why aren't they being compared to the shareholders, those that get the dividend from these big companies? Because these big companies are still making profits. Why aren't there huge profits being said to drive up inflation? Why
a lot of pension funds are in those companies as well.
I totally understand that. If you can afford to keep up your pension fund contribution in today's economic climate, then you're lucky, because it is one of the things that people will decide that they can't afford. You had the lady talking earlier about living within your means. Well, for many, they won't be able to afford to keep up a pension contribution. They can't afford to keep up trade union fees. They're looking for cheaper and cheaper insurance. It's not a case of living within your means when you might be on £30,000 a year, but you might have 2 children and your rent or your mortgage costs have gone up along with your other utilities, and you're left with literally nothing. These aren't people that are greedy. These aren't people that are lazy. They're people that are keeping all the services that we need afloat, and they just want a pay rise. And we do have to be clear, the pay rises that they're being awarded are not astronomical. In some of the places I see, they're lucky if they get 5%. It is not these 35% headline figures or even the 15% headline figures. They're not getting those pay rises. They're not. And to be clear as well, even if they were getting a 10% pay rise, that still equates to a pay cut because of how the cost of living has increased so hugely.
Good to bring Vivian in as well. Don't go anywhere. Vivian, I'll be with you, Onker, and I know our economists are listening intently as well. Vivian, hi. Vivian in Paisley, how are you? Good morning.
I'm fine.
So hearing these comments by the chief economist of the Bank of England, people should stop trying to keep up with the spiralling cost of living and accept they're worse off. We're in a poorer era. What do you think?
I don't think that's right. I don't think anybody should accept that. I certainly don't. I've been alive and tried to keep going for a long, long time, and it's really got impossible. It's now impossible. Even you do not spend your money on excessive things and on things that are considered not essential, you are left with very, very little and not enough to live on. And I'm on benefit. I'm on PIP and ESA, and I get around 13,500 a year to live on. At the end of the day, after I pay anything, I'm not left with 1 penny. And it's got so hard, and I don't accept it. With 13 years of Conservative government, and yeah, I certainly was better under Labour.
Well, we've got our politicians
Blair.
panel coming up, Tony Blair, our politicians panel coming up later on. Just give me an idea, Vivian, of the sacrifices you've had to make over the last couple of years.
In the last couple of years, or in the last 30?
30. Specifically, war in Ukraine, food prices, oil prices, all the knock-on effects. It's particularly acute now, isn't it? I appreciate what you're saying, but
food prices are going up weekly, fortnightly.
And how does it affect what you buy and what you eat as well?
I have to buy less. I can't always have what I need. And it does affect your health and your well-being. And that's not right. It's not right that anybody in this country should be putting their well-being on hold. Because
it's affecting your physical health and your mental health as well.
It is, yeah. It does.
And
as I say,
what about
I spend money on what is essential to live.
What's a luxury for you now?
A luxury? Do you know what? I don't know what. I couldn't tell you anymore. It's been so long since I've had a luxury. I actually can't tell you. I really can't remember.
Have you used a food bank at all? Have you been in that situation?
No, I'm not at that point yet, but I hear of people that are, and I really think they shouldn't be in that situation. Nobody should.
So kind of you to call this morning, Vivian. I really appreciate it. Joe and Vivian and Onker in Tamworth. And I'll come back to you if I can, Vivian, because I know that we've got a lot of interesting points coming in. You may wish to further comment. Onker, good morning.
Good morning. I'm trying to think of what to say that people haven't already said. Just empathising with Vivian with what she's just said. So within my business, I'm seeing it every day, unfortunately. So our sales are managed to track for value, but percentage-wise, with inflation, it's nowhere near. And obviously, it's because of things like Vivian's talking there, and as already been mentioned, the manufacturers and the wholesalers are hyperinflating by not passing on these savings. So, for example, now we've seen milk and bread prices coming down, but the wholesalers aren't passing it on. They're holding on to it as long as possible. We're having to argue constantly.
Well, this is what he's saying, isn't it? Hugh Pill is kind of saying this, Onker. He's saying that it's a kind of game of pass the parcel where each player is unwilling to accept the burden of higher prices that made them poorer and is passing it on.
Where it's reversing now. So, for example, the oil prices come down. We have to pay a fuel levy charge on every delivery we have.
Yeah.
We're having to force the wholesaler to say, right, the fuel price came down 3 weeks ago, but you've not moved. The fuel price goes up. The next day, the fuel levy goes up. So it's the benefit of other people. Then looking at it from the other side, every time something goes wrong, every time there's pressure, more and more people, so the 2008 recession, before COVID, then as things have come out the other side of COVID now, more and more people have been dragged into the issue of financial burden and are looked at with more disdain, whereas before it might have been the working class that was struggling, and more middle earners are being dragged into it also.
Dragged in, yeah.
And then the people that are earning more money necessarily, and it's not a bad thing that people are earning more money, it's a question of what's happening to help address the people that are now a larger proportion of the population that are now struggling. Whereas before it would have been a minority.
Yes,
we're getting to the point where it's going to become the majority.
The line is moving, certainly at the moment.
And at a rapid rate.
Yeah, I'll bring Thomas in a second, fund manager at Aberdeen. I'd be fascinated to know, Thomas, what you think about Vivian, what you think about Joe, and also Sandra coming up as well, and Onker there with some very powerful points. Morning, Sandra, in Paisley.
Good morning. Good morning, Nicky. Hello. Yes.
Hi. Thanks for this. I really appreciate it as ever. And so, what about what Hugh Pill, the chief economist at the Bank of England, says? Look, we are all poorer. We need to get used to it.
Yeah, and do you know what else worries me, Nicky, about this? I'm a carer. I worked as a civil servant, not a very lowly paid civil servant, but it was a job and there was a pension at the end of it. But my son was born with severe disabilities and I had to give up the job. And so I'm going to be poor all my life now. I'm going to have to depend on the state pension because of that. But I've always worked as long as I could. Carers, and that lady who was on and the thing, was terrible. Also, the food that we're having to eat at the moment and feed our children is very poor quality. I tried my best. I got the cost of living payment yesterday and I celebrated. I put money in the gas meter and then I bought ourselves leeks at £1 each. And I know the prices. I had my kind of pint of beans for 95 pence. That's how I celebrated. But I'm able to get some good quality food because with these bargain sausages, it's going to be a whole ticking time bomb of people being ill in the future, type 2 diabetes, other conditions. And that's, again, and I worry too about what other people said about the rhetoric, because it will be our fault that you get type 2 diabetes or whatever, rather than, the poor food you're having to feed your children at the moment. So, yep. So it's a ticking time bomb, Nicky.
How does it go down, Sandra, when you hear a big wheel in the Bank of England saying this? People are saying it's a clumsy phraseology, but some are saying, hey, he's got a point. You don't think so?
Oh, yeah. Well, do you know what worries me, Nicky? I can see the poor houses opening soon. I can see that being offered devolution. Well, we can't afford to give people benefits, so let's open the poor houses again. These people are out of touch. He's out of touch. Politicians are out of touch of all colours. They don't have a clue. The money they get for their food allowance is what is more than some people have to live on to feed their families for a week. And that's probably in 2 days worth of food. We've got this glorious coronation coming up soon, and it's a total waste of money as well. It's meant to make us feel good, but no, I don't know what. What would make us feel.
It's another phone. Put it all into the pot.
Sorry.
No, so that's fine. We'll be back with it. Listen, we've had Joe. Thomas Moore, fund manager at Aberdeen. And I know you say that his phraseology was unfortunate, the way he said it. Does he, Thomas Moore, does Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, do they understand Vivian, Joe, Onker, Sandra? Do they know what it's like for those people?
This is the issue. It's the challenge for them is to communicate, have this discourse, because actually even this programme, Nicky, is helpful. And I think if you're sitting in the Bank of England, you want this debate to be out in the open. You don't want it to be festering. Individually, we've got to do our best to keep up with the cost of living. And it's incredibly hard for people that you've talked to this morning, because, of course, all of us have different level of power. If we've got trade unions representing us, some people have got that to fight for them, other people haven't. You may find that you're in a job like plumbers where you've got loads of potential to grow your wages.
If you said to Hugh Pill or Andrew Bailey, what was it you got, Sandra? Leaks, because you got your payment,
weeks,
right?
Yes, £1 each, Nicky, for a week. £1.
Right.
£1 for a week.
So
And
that was
I wasn't for fishy swat. It was for leek and potato soup, which my son has asked me for weeks. No.
No, decent, lovely. I'm sure it was a beautiful soup with leek. Wow. I mean, does he? If he used to hear that, what would he make of it? That's what I'm asking. Really,
they're completely aware that inflation is a regressive tax. So inflation.
But what I'm saying is, I'm sorry, Thomas. I don't mean to be rude, but she's had a payment, and the big thing is, I can afford to buy a leek and a tin of beans. Did they get that?
You can argue with the way they're handling inflation, but they are aware that it's regressive. That's why they need to get inflation down. They know that this is causing this furore that we are discussing on this programme right now. This debate needs to happen, because every year that ticks by with inflation higher than wages, people you're speaking to today, they're getting poorer year by year. That inflation rate needs to come down, and the Bank of England is held accountable ultimately for the rate of inflation. They are responsible for getting inflation down, and part of the way they're doing that is by having this discussion. They're trying to influence wage negotiations. They're trying to get employers to say, look...
Can I come in, please?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to say I'll probably never be able to work, unfortunately, but I'm an unpaid carer. So I've contributed thousands of pounds to the system by not putting my son into care. But I get £70 a week. I would love to work. I've worked all my life until I had my son, and I tried to work again, but with these hospital appointments and things, I just couldn't. I was asked to leave. So what about people like me and the lady who had a disability and couldn't work? What's going to happen? We're not represented by unions or things, so who's going to represent us and think about our situation? And the way that
there is a United Community Union that can help support people who aren't in the workplace, but the issue is most people who are really struggling can't afford a trade union membership. But I would actively encourage you to go to Unite Community and look to see what they might be able to do to help.
Thank you.
Can I make another contribution, Nicky?
Of course you can. I just want to hear from. Of course you can. You're on my list, Richard, as ever.
Thank you.
But Harvey in Lincoln's with us, AD in Halifax, and I think it's going to be your turn to actually sum up what you've heard and process it for our listeners and our viewers. Harvey, what do you say? Morning.
Yeah, morning, Nicky. You look well on the TV. It's new to me, this channel, but well done to you all. This needs airing. What you've got to do is my heart goes out to the few that are struggling. They're not all struggling. Listen to me, they're not all struggling. You are encouraging people what money they've got in their pockets to go and buy takeaway foods. They don't want to work. You're encouraging these food banks. You're encouraging them to go there. You are advertising free mobility cars on the TV. You shouldn't be doing that.
Come on.
Because let me just finish. Let me just finish.
Okay.
Let me just finish. My heart goes out to those that are struggling, but you need to lay off these flat screen TVs, these brand new phones you're buying. I'm not talking about all of you. Let me finish. I've just come out of hospital. I had a pacemaker fitted. There's a fella in a bed next to me, 58 years of age, a lorry driver. I'm not going back to work. Why should I go back to work? I'm going on benefits. I'll get a free car and a blue badge. You are encouraging the government and the people to not send us the fields. The farmers are gagging for workers. You lot, you're not. You sit there and you're all earning big money like I am. I'm a self-made millionaire. I've worked all my life. I drive a £300 car. I don't buy designer clothes. Live beyond your means. By all means, do that. Those people that don't want to work out there know that the government and let me just say this and I'll get off the line.
This is nonsense.
The state will never go skint. The state will never go skint. So you're guaranteed to get your money. You go to the benefit office, you get your PPR, your APP, you get all these benefits. You don't pay. You don't pay. It's not rubbish. It's fact.
Do you know what, Harvey? Listen, this is what it's about. It's about letting people come on and say whatever they want to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Within reason. But you know what? I'm just intrigued by your position, because your position is not a million miles away from the vice chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson. He's saying some of the same stuff. We've got our politicians coming up at 10 o'clock. I'd love to hear you in conversation with some of our politicians, Harvey. Are you available in about 10 minutes' time?
Anytime. I want 24 hours to run the country, take the blue badges and free cars of those that,
Right.
that are taking advantage of us.
We'll get back to you, Harvey, and I'm going to put you on with the politicians because you raise a lot of issues, and I'd like to hear you in conversation with a Conservative MP, with a Labour MP, with a Green representative as well. Richard, I hear some huffing and puffing and sighing, and many people have been doing just that. Richard Murphy.
Sorry, I have to react to some things when I hear them and when I take offence, and I did just now. But I want to talk about some simple facts, and let's have some facts. I've already mentioned the fact that the claim that this is down to the war in Ukraine and the change in oil prices is wrong, because the oil price is the same now as before. I'm also looking right now at a chart in front of me of gas prices. And you know what? They are now 1/9 of what they were at the peak in 2022. And on average, they're at least 70% down on what they were over the last couple of years. But have we seen that in our domestic prices? No, because the government is keeping the price up at the moment, the same as the government is keeping the price of borrowing up at the moment. In fact, it's going to increase it again. Hugh Pill is going to increase inflation next month by putting up the interest rate yet again. And the government has increased tax. The one thing they don't want to increase is wages. And I'm blunt about this. This is a conspiracy. And there is a conspiracy going on. And the conspiracy is against working people in favour of the wealthy. And there is a class war going on in this country right now. And I can't pretend otherwise. And that class war is by the wealthy on working people. And that is something that we have to recognise. It isn't necessary.
I need to bring Thomas back on that. Thomas, go on.
Okay, but we could change policy. The point I'll make, very simple. We could cut taxes for those who are working. We would increase taxes on wealth to redistribute, because that is essential. We could cut interest rates, and we could spend more. And that is entirely possible. There is no constraint on the government, as we know, because if they spent, they would collect more tax revenue. Because as Martin said earlier, no, it was Arthur, I think it was, if you spend with people who are going to pass that money on into their communities, you actually create a virtuous multiplier. Every £1 spent on the NHS generates £4 of extra.
Thank you, Richard.
And that's what we need to do now.
Wait. I need to tell people the snooker's starting now on BBC Two with live coverage from the World Championship at the Crucible on 5 Live and BBC News. I want your questions for our politicians panel. They're coming up at 10 o'clock.